BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Thursday, and I was out driving today, and for the first time I saw the leaves begin to change this season. And it is the month of September. Technically it's still the summer, but autumn is just around the corner, and I cannot wait for October. I absolutely love that month. Yeah, of course, because of Halloween, but also it's just one of the best times of year here in West Virginia. So, a lot to anticipate. And just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. The first is that you can download this show for free at LaunchPad 1. There's a link to that in the description box. You can download the audio as a pure podcast. If you would like to download the video version, you can use YouTube Premium, but you have to pay for that one. LaunchPad 1 is free. And some great ways to support the show are by visiting Amazon.com to get a copy of the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan. It's a novel, murder mystery. Feel free to have a look. You can even get a free sample and such. And also, you can visit the Teespring page. Feel free to have a look at some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Today is mostly an announcement. The first is that, okay, now there's going to be two announcements. Today is mostly about announcements. Already went from one announcement to announcements plural. Wow, multiplying. I hate math, by the way. Yeah. But today is a day of announcements. There, I think I got it right. The first is that there is a new series here on this channel about the New Orleans Axeman. The first two episodes have been put out, and they are very general. It's like part 1 and part 1.5 is the way that I was describing it. We're also calling it part 0 and part 1. They are called the pre-introduction and the beginnings. And I say beginnings, plural, for two reasons. I mean, the New Orleans Axeman is a rather crazy story because it is the tale of an unidentified serial killer that was operating in New Orleans in 1910, 1911, thereabouts. It's possible that the Axeman crimes go back as early as 1909, and as of now, as I said, just at the beginning parts, I've been unable to identify an exact time frame when this early set of killings would have taken place, but the more conventional time frame for the New Orleans Axeman is 1918 to 1919, and with some of these other serial killer mysteries such as Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac Killer, it really can be quite similar. With the Zodiac Killer, some people think that the crimes committed by that person begin in 1962 with the murder of Ray Davis, and then they continued all the way up into the 1970s. Michael Cole would be a proponent of that theory. Well, not Ray Davis. He believes the Zodiac Killer began killing in 1963 with the Domingos Edwards murders, and his activities continued all the way to the murder of Richard Redditch, which was June 22nd, 1970. Don't quote me on that one, please. But it's definitely close to the summer solstice of 1970. So it's difficult to determine how many people this person actually killed. And then you have the exact opposite direction, where there's some people, like Thomas Henry Warren, who says not only did the Zodiac Killer not murder Ray Davis or Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards or any of the victims at all, there was no Zodiac Killer, and it was a hoax that someone was writing letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit. And the reason I mentioned him is because there is a new series available on the Zodiac Killer channel that is going to be called Interviews with the Experts, and it is hosted, of course, by me, Ned DeHaan. And that is going to happen mostly weekly on the Zodiac Killer channel, so if you haven't visited that one yet and subscribed, now's a great time to do so. You can follow along with all of these interviews that are going to be coming out. We're going to try to do one every week, and by we, I mean myself, but also Jack Cooper and Steve Beaumont and some other people who work with the on the Zodiac Killer channel, as well as whomever the guest is going to be. The first episode is already out now, and it was with Thomas Henry Horn. That's why I mentioned him at the get-go. And that was simply because they wanted him as the first guest. And I really have no design in the channel. I am only the host. It is totally their project. I'm just the person who is asking the questions and putting some things into motion. They wanted Thomas Henry Horn as the first guest because they heard me talking about the Zodiac hoax theory, and they were like, "Well, let's have Thomas Horn on there. I think that you two would do something, have a good discussion, and sharing some of the ideas." And right now, I would like to share some things with you. If you have either heard the interview already, or if you have not heard the interview, you can also listen to this one because I'm going to talk about all the things that should have been mentioned in the interview, but we didn't get to. And one of the reasons is because it's the Zodiac Killer channel, and Thomas Horn has lots of videos out on the Son of Sam, Charles Manson, the CIA, all kinds of subjects, but we couldn't really get too bogged down on those. We talked about the Manson family a little bit, mostly because of the Zodiac Manson connection. However, I think that the strength of the interview was discussing Thomas Horn's suspect for writing the letters Hal Snook. And the reason is because both of us want the truth. I mean, some people accuse Thomas Henry Horn of being a grifter or exaggerating his platform or misrepresenting certain details, and somebody even wrote in a comment that he doesn't even believe his own hoax theory. He's just trying to be entertaining, and entertaining himself mostly. And I talked to him about that in the interview that you can hear on the Zodiac Killer channel, episode 1 of Interviews with the Experts. And he gave his response. So I really want to talk, though, about the things that were not covered in the interview, and that is that no matter what, I think that he definitely wants to know the truth about Hal Snook, Harold K. Snook, the founder of the California Narcotics Officers Association, the World War II veteran, the former newspaperman, the former sporting goods store owner, like the guy who had his own little side project of selling displays that had fish fossils in them to museums. That's one thing that Hal did in his retirement. Him and his wife would assemble these displays for museums where they would find and collect fossils, and then they would put them into almost like diorama-like displays. And then Thomas Horn used to own one of those for a while. Hal Snook just did so many things, and I'm always learning new things about him. Recently, I learned that he was also someone who was heavily involved with the music scene in California, particularly jazz, as well as I think he said something about classical as well. And yeah, I learned about Hal Snook because of Thomas Henry Horn and the hoax theory. So I'm definitely coming at this with a type of lens, but in terms of someone who would have had the knowledge and insight to compose something like the Zodiac hoax, which is the idea that there wasn't a serial killer operating in California in 1968 and 69, or even, as we said, 1962 and all the way to 1970, that just didn't happen. Those are all unconnected murders, and somebody wrote letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit. Thomas Horn accuses Hal Snook of this because he, well, firstly, his handwriting is similar. I will give him that. Thomas Horn says it's an exact match. Obviously, that's not accepted by everyone, or this would be an unsolved case. But it's also because Hal would have had the brain for it. He was a scientist. He was a forensic scientist with the Narcotics Officers Association. The famous thing about him is that he could even testify at trials that this batch of meth was cooked in this laboratory that was operated by this gang. He had a very high understanding of the sciences, but particularly chemistry. And even if you look at the cover of the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, you can see the word serous oxalate when the Zodiac Killer said, "I'm mildly serious as to know how much money you have on my head." Well, I mean, that's a chemical name, and I mean, Warren has some other examples of how these could be chemical terms. Okay, so He is some guy who is familiar with the sciences, he's familiar with law enforcement, as we said, worked with the newspapers for a while, so he's familiar with the media. The thing that we did not get to talk about in the interview is it possible, hypothetically, if the hoax theory is true, that Hal Snook did this because he was recruited by members of the media? As of now, I think Thomas Horton is focusing in more on the CIA and trying to think that Hal Snook was some type of either CIA informant or operative. But in the past, he talked a lot about how the letters from the Zodiac Killer were a hoax created by the San Francisco Chronicle, and he claims that he has discovered a connection between Keith Power, a journalist at the San Francisco Chronicle, and Hal Snook, as well as there's a very big speculation that there could have been a connection between Robert Graysmith and Hal Snook as well, but I don't believe that that's been purely established. So the thing that I wish we could have discussed more was very simply just, is it possible that Hal Snook was not recruited by the CIA to do anything like this, but rather by the San Francisco Chronicle? That these reporters, Keith Power, Paul Avery, maybe even the cartoonist and production assistant Robert Graysmith, came up with this plan to create a 21st century Jack the Ripper, and they just found somebody who had the brain for it. And Evan from Texas brought up some very strong points in his first video on Hal Snook and the Lake Herman Road murders. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I highly recommend them. But he even said, it's almost as if the letters were written using every tactic possible to disguise somebody's handwriting, because this person wanted any handwriting expert to get suspicious. Hey, wait a second, is this a member of law enforcement? Let me see what's going on, in case anybody actually figured out what could possibly be happening. Now, one point that we didn't get to was Thomas Warren has a new suspect for the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and his name is Leonard Lake. Terrible. Leonard Lake at Lake Berryessa. It's a tongue twister, right? But yes, it is the Leonard Lake who is the Boneyard Killer. There were two Boneyard Killers, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. These are the guys that lured women into a secluded area, and they made snuff films of them. Very bizarre sex and deviant acts done on films, and they said really, really annoying things like, well, the other women found out that we were cold-hearted, so to speak. And I haven't seen them, of course, but I've read the transcripts of them, which have floated around in places online. Leonard Lake committed suicide by ingesting cyanide, and Charles Ng, I believe, is still in jail on death row to this day. There's a whole big fuss about extraditing him from Canada back to the United States of America because Canada didn't allow the death penalty. He was going to sit on death row and such. A lot of things around Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. I never, ever, infinity plus one times would have suspected Leonard Lake as a suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery. But, well, Thomas Horton didn't mention him once in the interview. He is now back on the suspect Dennis Land for the Lake Berryessa stabbing. And if this is a hoax, that means that there is either a different criminal at every Zodiac Killer crime scene, and then someone wrote letters taking credit for it. So he accuses Dennis Land of committing the Lake Berryessa stabbing. Dennis Land was the first park ranger on the scene who found Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. The reasons for this are that Dennis Land was out of radio contact at the time of the stabbing, and also that as a park ranger, he would have had access to the authorized entry road, so he could have made very sneaky entrances and exits, and as he was moving around. And this also could have provided an explanation about why the killer chose to wear that hood at Lake Berryessa, the only time that he wore that hood with the clip-on sunglasses. He wanted to hide his appearance because he was a park ranger there. He can also be placed at the scene. The biggest problem with Dennis Land as being the suspect is that Cecilia Shepard saw the Zodiac without his hood on. She saw him put the hood over his face. She could tell that he had brown hair and that he was a Caucasian male. Yes, Dennis Land had brown hair and he was a Caucasian male, but I mean, she saw the man without his hood on, and he's the first ranger at the scene, so that's a bit of a stretch. Crazier things have happened, but I mean, I'm definitely not convinced. Next point is that it's actually something that was discussed by both Drew Beeson and Richard Grinnell just here in the comments section on Black Box Online Radio, responding to my book discussion about the hoax theory, saying that if this were a hoax, then somebody would not have made a costume for Lake Berryessa. And Drew Beeson perhaps is the loudest voice in the world on this when he says that the perpetrator at Lake Berryessa was wearing that hooded costume because it had meaning to him. I mean, I don't accept the idea that the Zodiac wanted to stab Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard and leave one or both of them alive so they could tell the story of the costume. I simply think that that is not possible. And on the Zodiac Speaking podcast, they even said that Brian Hartnell survived by a millimeter. If the knife had gone a millimeter farther, then he would have passed away. So I don't think that the person who committed the stabbing had the awareness to know that Brian Hartnell was going to survive and live into his 60s and 70s. I think that that person wanted to kill them. So maybe Drew is completely right about that. And the second part that Drew and Richard were discussing is that if this were a hoax, somebody would not have gone to the trouble of making a hooded costume that has the Zodiac sign on it with care and precision. They would have used a scarf to tie around their neck, or a ski mask, or something that would have been much easier. Someone put in a lot of effort, and this is why Thomas Horn is now suspecting Leonard Lake of being the Lake Berryessa stabber, because he believes that it was a snuff film and that Dennis Land was the cameraman, but he didn't want to talk about Leonard Lake as a suspect, and I mean, I don't exactly have any strong challenges for that, other than plausible deniability. And there's also something called Hitchens' razor. We have Occam's razor and Hitchens' razor. There are several of these, right? Hitchens' razor is that the burden of proof is on the person making the claim. And then you can try and discuss the facts or make the challenges. But first, you have to see that person's attempt to prove their claim before you ever have to disprove it. So before I ever attempt to disprove Leonard Lake as the Lake Berryessa stabber, one of the Zodiac crimes, I would have to hear more, or hear an absolute solid explanation, like 45 minutes long at least, about why this guy committed it. Now, to talk about those 2 points as well, plausible deniability and Hitchens' razor, we can do a very nice segue into the Manson family. And Brian Davis of the Tate LaBianca radio program openly called out Thomas Henry Horn about, well, mostly not even Thomas Horn, but the people in the audience, like me, like you, like anyone who listens to these programs, and he was saying, why aren't people challenging this guy? Why aren't people calling him out when he is saying some extreme things? Not about the Zodiac Killer, but about the Manson family, and for some reason, Brian Davis thought it was an extreme thing to say that Thomas Horn said the victim at the Tate LaBianca murder, Stephen Parent, was shot by someone sitting in the back seat of his car. He's like, this guy's crazy, that's utterly ridiculous. Well, there are a lot more outrageous claims that would follow. I don't know why that would be the first one on the list. How about number 2? The Manson family didn't actually commit the murders at Cielo Drive. They were brainwashed by MK Ultra into thinking that they had committed the murders. Sharon Tate was actually killed by the serial killer Rodney Alcala, also known as the dating game killer. How about Susan Atkins was participating in pornography when she was disguising herself as Sharon Tate, like dressing up as Sharon Tate and playing her in pornographic films? How about those claims? Plausible deniability, Hitchens' razor. I mean, I think there's going to be a certain point when we would say, I think that that's either too ridiculous to discuss, or if you do want to make a case for that, well, you do it. I mean, I don't even know where I would begin trying to say that Sharon Tate was murdered by the serial killer Rodney Alcala and not Tex Watson. I mean, the burden of proof is on him, and if he wants to do another episode on that, or talk about some other points, or look at more of the nitty-gritty evidence, then we can discuss those things. I'm not opposed to discussing other people's theories. That's 90% of what I do on this channel, giving some commentary about them. Sometimes I share my own original observations, but I'm all about talking about other people's theories. It's just sometimes it gets so extreme that I simply have to say, I don't think you have proven your case, or there definitely is not consensus that Sharon Tate was murdered by the serial killer Rodney Alcala. And on that note, this MK Ultra angle with the Manson family becomes very important because of a particular book called Chaos, written by Tom O'Neill. And somebody asked a question, I think it was Popman who wrote in the comments section, about which book would I recommend about Charles Manson and the Manson family. And absolutely not Helter Skelter. I repeat, not Helter Skelter by Bugliosi, because that book was just filled with lies. And yeah, as I said, I'm a regular listener to the Tate LaBianca radio program now. And the overall message of that program, hosted by Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg, is that Vincent Bugliosi was a liar. Yes, they want answers about everything to do with the Manson family, but it's mostly about how Vincent Bugliosi was a liar. He abused his power, and he lied in not only the book, but also the trial, where the Manson family members were being prosecuted. His stuff is filled with misinformation. Now, which book would I recommend? I really haven't read too many books about the Manson family, but of course Chaos by Tom O'Neill. You need to read it, but not accept it as gospel, because there's some connections in there about how Charles Manson could have been a CIA informant, not an operative, but an informant, meaning the CIA was using him to gather information, and then you have the same doctor who is working in multiple places with MKUltra, the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, and possibly, I think also they accused him of being Jack Ruby's psychiatrist. His name is Dr. Jolly West. So, yes, read Chaos by Tom O'Neill, but don't let it escape scrutiny. And the episode from the Tate LaBianca radio program that I was listening to as I was out driving today was discussing just that. Like, one of Tom O'Neill's claims is that he conducted some interviews, and that the Cielo Drive murders that saw the death of Sharon Tate, as well as Jay Sebring and Abigail Folger, Stephen Parent, and Wojtek Frykowski, that series of murders could have possibly been scheduled for the night before, but somebody went to Jay Sebring's house, and they cut the power lines. The power didn't go out on its own. The lines were cut. The cable line was cut too as well. And then when they were cut, there was a flash of light because he even interviewed the electrician, and I heard the audio clip played on the radio program. The electrician was named Paul. It sounds just like Greenwald. Yeah, I was about to say it sounds just like that journalist's name. Paul Greenwald was his name. And he said, if there were any off lights in the house, they would have turned on if that wire had been cut. This is Tom O'Neill's claim, and he has the supporting interviews to back it up. The night before, there could have possibly been someone who was going after Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring, meaning that were they targeted specifically? And they cut the wire, and then all the lights in the house go on, and there's just this giant flash of light emanating from every single room. And Tom O'Neill speculates that perhaps somebody got spooked by that, or it really bothered them because they cut the power and they didn't expect everything to go light. So they just took off, and then the murders happened the next night. Well, on the Tate LaBianca radio program, they're really trying to find out, is that actually true? And they made somewhat of a convincing case that could not have happened the night before, not before August 8th or August 9th of 1969. They had somewhat of a strong case that actually happened much closer to August 1st. and that in the 50 years since then, when Tom O'Neill was interviewing Paul Greenwade, he simply made a mistake. And they have their own reasons for that, which I won't get into now, but the point is, you need to challenge those claims in Tom O'Neill's book. I know he spent 20 years writing it. The books, though, that I hope to read about Charles Manson in the near future would be the one from Mark Hewitt, about Manson behind bars. At some point, perhaps I'll read Bill Nelson's book, but I'm not too, I don't have that too high on my list. The other one, the one by Ivor Davis that came out, I think just a year or 2 years ago, the most recent one from Ivor Davis, and Tonna Laufenberg's The Defense Never Rested, because I think they put out that book for a while, but now it's no longer available for purchase, and then an updated version is going to come soon. Tonna Laufenberg, as I said, is the host of the Tate LaBianca radio program sometimes. Sometimes she's a co-host. And she was also holding the claim of being the last person to interview Charles Manson. And these are just some things responding to a question that somebody asked me. And I think the whole point is, when someone has a groundbreaking claim in the true crime world, we need to challenge them, whether it's Bugliosi or Thomas Warren or Tom O'Neill, any of these people, and any of the people that you can hear about on the Zodiac Killer channel, interviews with the experts, they all need to be challenged. So, the Zodiac hoax theory is rather fascinating. I definitely do not endorse it, though, because some points that I felt were a little bit hard for me to accept is that not only did Thomas Warren say that Stephen Parent was shot by a passenger in his car, specifically a passenger sitting in the back seat, I think he may have said one sentence on his show, The Stones Unturned, that the killer could have been in the like the front passenger seat. Then he said the back passenger seat. He said the same thing about the Lake Herman Road murders in our interview, that he thought somebody snuck into David Faraday's car. And, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen get back in the car. Then someone holds them up at gunpoint and tells them either to drive to Lake Herman Road, or they forced David into the passenger seat and put Betty Lou in another car, and that person drove them to Lake Herman Road. So, I guess it's a variant of the abduction theory. Ever since I heard Ray Grant talk about the Lake Herman Road abduction theory, that David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were abducted prior to their murder, I've wanted to do an episode on it. I just still don't know if I can wrap my head around it, about how David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were abducted. I can completely comprehend that there is more than an hour of their night missing. They were murdered on December 20th of 1968. I can completely get that, but does that mean that they were abducted? Much like the Tate LaBianca murders, all the victims passed away. The same with the Lake Herman Road murders. The victims passed away. We can't hear from the victims. Like, say, for example, Brian Hartnell survived the Lake Berryessa stabbing. All right, well, he can tell his side of the story about, oh, yeah, Cecilia and I were doing this. We were going to drive to San Francisco. Then we thought it was too late. So last minute, we decided to go to Lake Berryessa. Okay, he can tell you what they were doing and what they were thinking and what was going on. And maybe he also told his friends about what he was going to do. With David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, both of them passed away, and a lot of their secrets have been lost to time. Whereas, and yeah, the same thing with the Tate LaBianca murders, August 8th, 9th, and 10th, I guess, really, depending on which time frame you use. Then those crimes, all we have are the stories from the perpetrators, and they're all liars. That's another reason why I listen to the Tate LaBianca program, because they give responses like that. The only people who live to tell the tale are the criminals, and they are all liars. And I also wasn't telling you that list of books simply to respond to a challenge question. I replied to Popmon in the comment section answering that question about which book about Manson would you recommend, and I completely forgot one. This is the whole reason I brought it up on the show right now. And the other book that I meant to recommend is Reflection by Lynette Squeaky Fromme. After Squeaky got out of jail for drawing a gun on Gerald Ford, she wrote a book called Reflection. It's spelled Reflexion. I don't like math. I can't spell either, so that was a challenge. I was like, how do you even spell reflection normally? I use autocorrect on everything. I mean it. I was sitting with one of my cousins once, and she was just spelling out complicated words or something like, I don't know, bisect or something like that, or fraction. And I was like, wow, you can do that without autocorrect? I can't do that. But, yeah, Reflection, and not only that, Squeaky misspelled the title of her book on purpose. I don't know, she always was kind of weird and so on. But, yeah, I would definitely want to put that at the top of my list because last year I was listening to one of the promotional interviews that Squeaky was doing about that book, Reflection, because she was one of the few Manson family members to get out of jail, and she didn't shoot at Gerald Ford. She pulled a gun on him, and she even said it was done out of protest. The bullet wasn't even in the chamber, and she could have fired 2 shots at him if she had wanted to. She did it out of protest, and I guess the theories have been going back and forth for a while. I think at one time she said that she wanted to get press coverage back on the Manson family so that they would get parole hearings. I don't know, drawing a gun on the president is a good way to get your friends out of jail by putting yourself in jail. Still recommend her book. But aside from that, actually, I do have to share one more thing about that. It's possible that that is all baloney, and that she did draw the gun on Gerald Ford, and that she didn't know that the bullet had been exited from the chamber. They found a bullet on her bathroom floor, so that seemed rather consistent that she had unloaded it, but I mean, it's possible that she was simply mistaken and she thought there was a bullet in the chamber, or maybe she hesitated in some way that caused some type of malfunction in the gun. How do you know? How do you really know who's telling the truth? With the Manson family, Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg brought up a point that I definitely have thought about so frequently. The world thinks about so frequently, and that is that when you're watching the Manson family in interviews, whether it's Tex Watson or Leslie Van Houten, they are sharing all of their sides of the story about, yeah, I'm completely rehabilitated, I deserve parole, I take full responsibility for my actions in the Tate LaBianca murders. Oh yeah, but by the way, it was all Charlie's fault. Oh yeah, but by the way, that wasn't really me, that was the drugs. And it's just this full responsibility is taken, except all the blame is still going to Charlie. And as I said, the entire world is aware of that. When you read the comments on any of the interviews, whether it's with Patricia Krenwinkel or Leslie Van Houten, they are people are just like, hey, we can see through you. I mean, you don't seem to show an ounce of responsibility for what you've done. It's just all about blaming somebody else. And another point, though, about the parole system. Firstly, I frequently quoted Stephen Kay from the one documentary segment they did on Patricia Krenwinkel when she was talking about how she deserves parole because she's been rehabilitated, and Stephen Kay, the squirrely, slimy prosecutor who attends all these parole hearings, said, well, that's too bad because the judicial system is not about rehabilitation, it's about punishment. And Sharon Tate's sister Patty said very clearly that Patricia Krenwinkel is one of the most vile members of the Manson family because she openly went out to kill in the name of Charles Manson or Helter Skelter or anything, whatever motive it was, no matter what reason it was. Patricia Krenwinkel went out on both nights of activity. She didn't have any ounce of, oh, something bad happened at the Cielo Drive house. Well, perhaps I shouldn't have done that. So she was like, whatever, let's go out and do it again. Or passionately going out and doing it again. And another aspect of parole is that if somebody could be so easily manipulated into committing murder, then are they not dangerous, even if they're 70 years old? Or if somebody could so easily be put in this drug-induced state where they can where they can cause harm to other people, how do they know that that won't happen again, even in their 70s? Not to say something like the Cielo Drive murders, but something destructive. That's one of the reasons why people are also denied parole or the governor reverses the decisions. And we heard this very clearly in the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Nick Godejohn. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was the woman who was forced to live as if she had cancer and muscular dystrophy. Her mother forced her to be in a wheelchair for most of her childhood, even though she didn't have those ailments. Her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, was suffering with Munchausen syndrome, Munchausen by proxy, where she's abusing her daughter in this weird way, is for various reasons. They made a miniseries about her called The Act, and I think Patricia Arquette won the Globe for that one, and I absolutely love that. I saw it on Hulu. It's a horribly, horribly dark story, but sometimes you need to watch things like that. And the whole reason I'm telling you this is the assailant in the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard was Gypsy Rose's boyfriend named Nick Godejohn, and he had autism spectrum disorder, and he was manipulated into committing murder by Gypsy Rose Blanchard. So says me. Other people dispute that, but I say that he was. And I was like, okay, for starters, this guy had his own mental issues, and it was completely orchestrated by his girlfriend. Yes, he was an active participant, but why was he given life without the possibility of parole? I even could understand sentencing him to 60 years or something, or Dr. Todd Grande even recommended giving him life with parole. But the reason why he was given life without the possibility of parole is, okay, she orchestrated the murder. She concocted this plan. Number one, he did it for a selfish motivation, is so he could have access to her without her mother interfering. He could have access to a sexual partner, so he committed a murder in that name. And the second reason is, if he's so easily susceptible to manipulation, then he's dangerous. If somebody manipulated him into committing a crime like that, he's dangerous. If somebody could manipulate Patricia Krenwinkel into participating in the murders of not one, not two, but 7 different people, maybe 8 or 9 if you count Gary Hinman and Shorty Shea and whatever involvement she may have had with them. I mean, I'm really not trying to put any number on it, but I mean, she'd participated in some very destructive actions. If someone is able to be susceptible to that level of destructive behavior, or manipulation that leads to that level of destructive behavior, perhaps they're too dangerous to ever be released from prison, and that's a very, very saddening thing, because it comes to a certain point when you have to agree with somebody like Stephen K. All right, well, you committed a murder for your own selfishness. You have to spend the rest of your life in prison. You're gonna be absolutely miserable about that, but it's about punishment, not about rehabilitation. And I think that's where we're going to have to leave it at for now. I threw in a bunch of Manson material into this one, but started out talking about the Zodiac hoax theory, and Thomas Henry Horn has numerous videos on the Manson family. I hope you'll watch this one on Sharon Tate and how she was murdered by the serial killer Rodney Alcala. Take it for what you will. And I will leave you with a point of clarification. On the most recent Professor Dad livestream that I did with Thomas Horn, Drew Beeson and Evan from Texas and New York Patriot appeared. He said, okay, he isn't certain that Sharon Tate was murdered by Rodney Alcala. He is just a suspect in Thomas Horn's mind, but he has many videos on the Manson family. That's why I was talking about them. And we talked about Manson a little bit in the interview, and this was all about sharing the things that are not mentioned in the Zodiac Killer Channel interview. The new series is called Interviews with the Experts, available on the Zodiac Killer Channel. It is hosted by me, and we're hoping that it's going to come out at least once a week over the next course of as long as we can possibly manage it. Okay, so please feel free to go over to the Zodiac Killer Channel, watch the series Interviews with the Experts. and I will see you guys over on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.